Welcome back, my friends, to another fantabulous episode of 15-Minute Free Thinking with me, your host, Carpo. And this was actually a spontaneous podcast. I just finished making a podcast to young men about the crazy state of affairs with being a young man in today's world. But afterwards, I realized that my podcast recorder hadn't even been recording. Go figure. Technology, right? So my GoPro is functioning. At least I have the video from that. But afterward, I got to thinking about rites of passage as I had the discussion towards the end of the video about young men, and something that I think really needs to be discussed more in society right now, which fortunately it is being discussed more now, which is psychedelic drugs and even psychedelic experiences, which, just to be clear, psychedelic means, mind manifesting, psychedelic. So it's mind manifesting, but you could call it many different terms. Revealing the true self, which could be revealing the God within, revealing who you are in this universe to yourself. Unless you've had a psychedelic experience, it's very difficult to explain what that's like. But it's not always induced by ingesting a substance. But when we do get into this discussion about psychedelic drugs, let's just say to start, there are many different types. And it is very difficult these days to know what you're getting. If somebody buys a drug off the streets, some sort of a powder or a tablet or a pill or a piece of paper, it could be anything. They might say it's LSD. It's most likely something like LSD, LAD or LAD, or various different, I guess they would be, anything that looks very similar to the compound, may have similar effects, but not be quite, and not necessarily worse. It might even be better for the person. Different compounds, even like 2CB, which people have been taking since Alexander Shulgin synthesized it in the 70s again, and said it was his favorite psychedelic ever. And then, of course, there's combinations of these substances like 2CB or LSD. And then there's psilocybin mushrooms, which, of course, everyone knows by now because they're considered some of the safest, because you know what you're getting. You can see the mushroom. This doesn't mean that we don't synthesize psilocybin and psilocin, which people do, but let's just try to keep this simple for the sake of this podcast. I want to talk about psychedelics in a layman terms, in a way that allows them to be more accessible to more people, while also cautioning folks to be aware that there can be negative side effects. Now, there's only two countries, I think, in the world that allow drug commercials, and that's the US and New Zealand. You see them where some AstraZeneca commercial where half of the commercial is just side effects, right? And then they have psychedelics, right? Which cannot be patented because psilocybin, is naturally occurring in mushrooms. You can't patent it. LSD is probably already patented somewhere. It was originally invented, by Albert Hofmann, a Swiss chemist. But as far as anybody really profiting on this, the reason why psychedelics aren't very profitable is very simple. They're cheap to manufacture. They're relatively safe, don't require any other medication on the side to deal with the side effects. And once you've done them a few times, you don't need to go back. And a lot of people don't think that the healthcare system is that corrupt and that crooked to where, well, of course they want to heal us, right? And I'm not one of these quacks that thinks that all doctors don't care about us. But the healthcare system as a whole is set up to be inefficient and not what it really could be if they were willing to look at holistic health and different methods without having to rely on patent protection to protect their own products. We saw what happened during COVID. I mean, the lunacy surrounding, a mandatory shot was just out of this world. And, I haven't forgot that. I don't think anybody else has, but I'm sure that you're on one side or the other. Either it saved the world or it was, a horrible thing that they forced people to do. And I'm not all about mandatory medicine, but for the sake of bringing that up, what if it was mandatory for everybody who went into Congress to take LSD together in the fucking chamber and be locked together for like 12 hours before they have a session before they can even, move on to the next 4 years of presidency? Sounds crazy, doesn't it? To a person who's never taken psychedelics, that might sound like a total joke. To anybody who's ever taken psychedelics, having an ayahuasca ceremony in Congress would probably be the best thing that we could do for this country. And I say that firmly believing that's true. I'm saying that I think that psychedelics are a way for us to commune with energies and awarenesses that are beyond our scope of understanding. Not just that we have an experience where we see colors and hear sounds and say, wow, this is amazing, which that's all part of it. But once you've gotten past that, if you're a psychonaut and you've moved past the kind of age of wonder, the period of wonder, and you've laid with your eyes closed in a K-hole or in a deep mushroom trip or whatever it might be, 2CB, LSD, ayahuasca, if that's your thing, DMT. I have a book behind me, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And actually, DMT is a world that I think deserves its own video. I don't want to talk about it here. But do I think that DMT is, well, let's just say it's like tapping into a signal that you're not meant to tap into. That's the only way I can put it. That there are dimensions within dimensions and layers of reality. And that sometimes you just see shit, and sometimes you see shit that you're not supposed to see. And with dimethyltryptamine, that seems to be the case. Rick Strassman, I think it was, the book, let me grab it here. It's a good book. I read it because I was fascinated with dimethyltryptamine and a variety of chemistry and different... Yes, here it is. DMT, the Spirit Molecule, a doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near-death and mystical experiences. And of course, for the podcast you can't see, but the video you can see that there's a picture on the front, which is probably Alex Gray, he's a doctor, I believe, who's a painter, and he does these amazing paintings of psychedelic experiences. So Rick Strassman wrote this book about all his different patients and the experiences they had. I'll throw it there on the Necronomicon. I've got a lot of weird books I'll go through one day, but there's a lot to be said about reading books again. But that book was really something unique. And I thought, okay, DMT does seem to be the wildest ride I've ever had. And then only a couple of years ago, I was introduced to ketamine because I had waited. Somebody told me that I probably shouldn't try it because it was too good for a person like me, a person who knew me well. And I said, okay, thank you. Then I got some and then I never took it. And eventually I tried it and it was all it's cracked up to be, but not addictive in the way that people might think. Not the kind of thing where you become a junkie, but the kind of thing where you try it and you say, this is amazing. This is how I can connect with a different frequency of existence. Like stepping outside of yourself in your own mind and communicating on a channel that's different from your own. I know this sounds crazy to a lot of people, but anybody who's been there, will know what I'm talking about. It's realer than real. There are places you can go that are more real than reality. To anyone who's never had a psychedelic experience, let me say, in layman terms, have you ever had a dream, right? That like was so fucking real that it felt realer than life? Because I think it was around 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I got really into lucid dreaming. I was like, ooh, this sounds fun. And so I started reading about it. I read a couple books. Read Carlos Castaneda, The Art of Dreaming. Then I read a book by Lucille something. I can't remember the name of the book, but it was Dreams and Interpretations. And it was all about how to have a lucid dream, how to wake up in the morning, go back to sleep, wake up, remember your dreams. I had a voice recorder. Must have had like dozens of different, recordings on there. And I still to this day, haven't gone through them all, but I've listened to a lot of them and I'm like, wow, that's a weird dream. I remember asking to meet my spirit guide. I remember asking all these different, to go to these places. I was like, I want to create a house, build a house. I went and manifested a table and a house, and I could fly in my dreams, and I got better and better and better. And one day I just stopped. I was like, why did you stop? I don't know. I felt like I was interfering with my dreams, right? Like my body needed to do what it needed to do. So I'm getting to a point here. This is exactly what happened with psychedelics for me. When I was young, I took psychedelics for a very long time. On and off, I guess. It probably, in retrospect, wasn't as many times as I thought. But let's just say it was hundreds of times at least. And each time was something unique and with a different group. And I had some wild experiences, really wild. And I thought that I knew what was up. Let's just say that, right? And until later on in life, until I discovered ketamine, it allowed me to kind of put together all these different psychedelic aspects and appreciate and understand what I was seeing. Not seeing with my eyes, but seeing. And it made the most sense it's ever made. It was almost like a channel was opened up that allowed me to communicate differently with the universe that wasn't as cluttered, if that makes sense. So any psychonauts out there, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because let's just say every drug has its own unique classification, its own unique flavor, if you will. But ketamine can be anything. It's a chameleon. It's like it's a salt, from what I understand. And this is where it got funny, because this is what inspired me to make this video. I was thinking, well, okay, yeah, it's a salt. What does that even mean? What does that mean? It's a salt. When people hear salt, they think the word salt, and it's different in chemistry, And I got into all these thoughts about how harmful drugs really are to us, and how we have such a stigma on talking about substances. There's a lot of shadow work we need to do. Shadow work is just finding your other side that you ignore and dealing with it, in general. These psychedelics can help us actually find those things. And we've known this for thousands of years. Not for every single person. Some people should not do them. Absolutely. If you have, a predisposition to schizophrenia or psychosis, you might want to think twice. But, you're like somebody like me, you know, around 50 years old, you're just going through your life, and maybe you lost a job, or maybe you know, lost a loved one, and then you just want to be able to recover from that. A psychedelic journey can help people really reassess their value of life and death, and appreciate what they have, and the gratitude that comes from a good psychedelic experience can be so long lasting that that's what inspires me to want to talk about it. Because knowing a good journey, not microdosing, that's a totally different story altogether, but taking one good dose and having a great night, maybe even with some other people, you know. I watched I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about psychedelic therapy companies and businesses lately, because that's what I want to do in the long run. I would like to start my own business where I sit in with people and help them through their experiences and talk them through them. And the only thing that's held me back from doing it this far has been my own insecurity and other people telling me, oh, you don't have qualifications. You don't have qualifications. Fuck that. I just don't. We're finally in an era where we can move past that. I'm definitely going to work with professionals, of course, you know, if I do something like this and start a serious business. But I'm talking about having gatherings of like 4 or 5, 6 people in an area, you know, in a place with a comfortable environment, taking mushrooms, doing rituals, maybe having some shamanic, like humming, or whatever a person chooses to do. Have your own space to go to. Have a nice safe space for people to journey if they want to take deeper trips, like with bigger psychedelics, or even completely be able to isolate yourself, like with ketamine. Sometimes it's better that way. So there's 2 different ways to do psychedelics. One is to get to know people better by doing them with other folks, which to me is my favorite personally. And you bond with large groups of people and realize everybody's just like you. Or you take it by yourself, and that's for a different type of trip. And that's what a psychonaut does. A psychonaut isn't one who just takes psychedelics to party. And if you are one of us and you've gone deep like that by yourself, you know, I commend you, because I know it's a painful journey. You have to go off by yourself sometimes and just kind of trip in your own little zone. But those moments, I'm telling you, they can be so revelatory that there's no words that can express, you know, the experiences that we can have. Like the universe is speaking through us, and we feel it, and we feel it in our hearts and our souls. And the next day it's still there, and we're like, what was that? You know, you think, oh, that's something that science would tell you is all in your head. So I stopped trying to defend it long ago, psychedelics. Like, I'm not going to try to say that God is real and that God manifests through psychedelic substances, or that psychedelics might open a channel to God to communicate to people, which may have a lot to do with biblical texts and various other, you know, prophets. Honestly, it's interesting. I don't know. Was Jesus a mushroom? I don't know. But that's not the point. It's not about historically what people did. It's about right now, what can we do to get society back on track and out of this fucking cesspool that we find ourselves in. And I guess when I say society, I mean Western society, but I mean, there's a lot of shit going on in the East too. Russia has their problems. China has their problems. Japan, fuck, everybody's got their issues. Every country has problems right now. We're moving into a very precarious time. And psychedelics might be able to help us through this. They really might. It's like, when I first started making YouTube videos and podcasts, well, before podcasts, I guess, that was like, 14 years ago, you couldn't talk about psychedelics, you couldn't talk about LSD or mushrooms without them. At least now they might age restrict it, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But back then, you never knew if a channel was going to get deleted for misinformation or something. So not enough people talked about their experiences, and the ones that did, all those videos are gone. I remember them. There were so many good places to go. But if you're a person who's curious about these things, you can still go to various trip report websites. They have some on Reddit. I don't check those out, but there's an old school website called Arrowid, EROWID. And if you type in Arrowid and just arrowid.com, right, and then cross-reference it with any drug you want, you will come up with trip reports, dosage reports. I want to see people be safe with these things, and that's why legalization is so important, that people are able to access them relatively safely, right? Psilocybin, there's no real known lethal dose, or the LD50, which was the lethal dose that would kill half people who take it. I think it's like, pounds and pounds and pounds, more mushrooms than you could ever possibly eat. And LSD, I don't think they ever found it either. I mean, a person might have a heart attack if they took too much, but I imagine your body will shut down at some point. They're not like other drugs, like opiates, where it stops your respiratory, system. So they're generally safe, but you still have to know what you're taking and how much you're taking. And that makes it scary for people, and that's understandable. Totally understandable. I fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you view it, was introduced when I was still young and dumb, and I didn't know any better. And so I didn't have to think too much about it the way I did like about ketamine for years. And then I'm glad I waited, because it actually gave me the best glimpse. I was able to repackage and understand all of these different experiences I'd had through ketamine, and it kind of amplified that experience into understanding what our ancestors had gone through mentally to make them believe that there are gods, and what these gods might want, if anything. And I know people might think, gods? What do you mean gods? Think of it as layers, like an onion, anything else. Everything has layers. We're an experiment, okay? However you look at it, whatever your religion or belief system might be, we're basically running amok here, and hoping that we, as a human species, this is my belief anyway, that we can come together in time to see that we have such potential to improve our planet and our world, our lives together, that if everybody overnight could flip a switch in their brains to say, oh, you're cool, would it stop all conflict? No. I'm not a utopian. I don't believe in that. There will always be fights and arguments. I'm talking about the desire for power as a disease, the desire for control by leaders as a disease, the fact that here we are in this world, we could actually just tomorrow, if a god, quote unquote, was strong enough to come down and, or at least enter people's minds and say, hey, shut the fuck up, I'm here. Well, that's of course not going to happen, because that's not what God is, in my opinion. But could that change the whole world? Could tomorrow there be world everlasting peace if there was something behind the gears? And people are so desperate for there to be something behind the gears. But what I found, this isn't what people want to hear probably, but through my deepest psychedelic journeys, I found that at the very bottom, in those cogs and gears, is nothing. It's black and white. It's just black and white, black and white, black, white, black, white, black, white. It's a duality, if you want to call it that. It's two yin yang. You can call it a yin yang. It's the expression of polar opposites. It's magnetism. That's everything. Everything. And all of it is working in harmony and spinning in this like cacophony. To us, it looks like the world and our bodies and our lives. But to the universe, it's spinning chaos. Well, I could probably go on for a while, but I probably don't need to. I think I'm glad the camera's still going because I wasn't sure. But it tends to cut off at like 30 minutes, and I definitely don't want to lose this as a podcast. I wanted to just make a quick psychedelic podcast to say, you know, we can find a closer connection to what we call God through psychedelic drugs, but we have to take the stigma away from them. And this also includes the religious community that want people to come to God or be closer to God. If you're a religious person and you're one of the people who would say, well, psychedelics aren't the same thing as religious experience, I would say, you should urge it, because if maybe people will come to your church, you know, maybe people will, if truth is out there, then people will find it through the psychedelic experience. But I think what you'll find is that it's an old world religion, the one that a lot of people have come to. It's almost it's not paganism, but it's a form of not earth worship. You see, earth worship is just a way of revering what's here for us from the greater. And it's these onion layers, as I said, of God and of the universe, things that are beyond our comprehension as mere mortals. And if we're okay with that, we can come back down and land on this plane and say, well, I've just got to live my life now. I can't be worrying about what happens in the other world or the afterlife or before I was born. What really matters is right now. How do I interact with the environment that I'm given? And I think that's what we're all working on. And then one day we'll fade away and we won't be in the environment anymore. Somebody will take our place, or something will take our place. We're not even the same atoms we were a few years ago. So, you know, what the hell really is going on out there, right? And if taking psychedelics can get a person to understand those things and bring them to that level of, you know, acceptance of just being, maybe Congress should be forced to take them. Just a thought. Anyway, that's my rant. It's over. Appreciate you coming. You can check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel, or my Buy Me a Coffee in the link. And I also have a YouTube channel if you're listening to the podcast, and I have a podcast if you're listening to the YouTube channel. Carpo 719 and 15-minute free thinking. And we're going to go into some depth on this one. I don't even know if I'm going to make this one public for everyone. Some of the videos I just make just for my patrons, because especially psychedelic content, because I don't want YouTube to demonetize it, or not demonetize, but censor it or delete it. I don't usually put ads on my videos anyway. I depend on y'all, because y'all are fucking badasses. So be well, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care of each other, and it's a new dawn for psychedelic research, and I think it's going to go well. I really do.